Welcome to another episode of Build That App. You are the lucky prize-winning contestant, and you get to see this video with me talking to you as your prize and the host of the show. You know what? This analogy doesn't make sense anymore. You know what? Bit's over. So yeah, we're here continuing our full stack CRUD app from scratch series, which we have already technically completed by finishing out all of our CRUD operations, and now we're moving towards some, well, React knowledge, React tricks, tips, and tools for your tool belt out there. And I am dreading trying to style this thing. I have actually reshot this video 3 or 4 times, and I'm making a decision here for this point in the video. I am going to choose to style it off camera, give y'all a video and a commit you can refer to in my GitHub to see the class names and elements I've added and moved around. And I'll have a quick video, and the next video after this will be me explaining the high points of the styling choices I made and some common rules or flex rules or cool things I did along the way to make it look like a half-decent application. Because after 30 to 45 minutes of simply adding class names, toggling back to the browser, refreshing the browser, coming back here, adjusting a class name, adjusting a padding, a margin, I don't feel like that's compelling content. Now, I've watched YouTube tutorials, and I bought Udemy courses way back in the day when I was a fresh alumni after Covalence. I was just so hungry for knowledge. I just went and bought more tutorials to watch. And I didn't mind watching someone add a bunch of CSS rules, but you could tell a lot of the times they were just scripted and they went through them because, again, I don't think it's compelling to watch somebody do what they do in the real world, which is try that, doesn't look good, try this, refresh, doesn't look good on mobile. And, hacking and slashing over the course of an hour with a bunch of crap is not going to be fun for y'all. Now, if I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments down below, which make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We're almost at 5K, y'all. Get us that push over there. So, I will make a video going in depth of me actually coding out the styling with Tailwind and whatnot. But again, this choice I'm making now will be style off camera, and the next video will go over all of the high points of my styling choices that I made, some Tailwind tricks that I might have employed, for example, building again, I told y'all I'm a huge proponent of Bootstrap, and I got very reliant on container row call back in Bootstrap days, and I can show you how to build your own version of that here in Tailwind as well. So again, I'll cover the high points of what I styled, how and why, and what choices I made, and I'll be in the next video. So for this one, I'm still going to show off, we're going to continue our discussion of some cool component building secrets that I can teach y'all by using stuff like this, right? So I showed y'all about Twitter merge and how, or not Twitter merge, I just saw TW and said Twitter, which dumpster fire these days. It's always been a dumpster fire, who am I kidding? This is Tailwind merge for handling those class name problems when it comes to the cascading algorithm, right? Having competing classes. We fixed that problem here. There's actually some other cool things that we could do when it comes to styling our components here. So, for example, I'm going to build out 2 components in this video and talk about some cool constants and types that we could use here. And we're going to extract them out into components out of our views, and I'll show you all some cool tricks along the way. That way, if you look at my repo and my commit history, or in the next video, you won't be completely lost of what I built and how. So let's go ahead and show y'all taking this and amplifying it, moving it a step higher as we're looking at it already, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to build an input component that over time is going to be replacing all of my inputs minus the text area across my application. So my register form, I think, has email, password, first, last name. So that's 4 inputs, 2 inputs here, as well as anywhere else in my application. I would love to be able to import an input component, provide the appropriate attributes, whether they're HTML DOM style attributes, React specific attributes, not being granted, value and onChange are DOM attributes. But again, we use them here with React and JavaScript objects and JavaScript functions. We pass them the values. If I want to provide custom props to my input for sizing or color options, there are some really cool techniques that you could use to do that, that's what the purpose of this video is going to be, right? So let's start coding some stuff out. So yeah, I want an input. Let's go ahead and grab my template real quick here so I can paste it in yonder and quickly change the word template to input. All right. Now, ultimately, this is going to return an input element. I'm not interested in any shape, way, or form returning more and more divs here because it's going to cause a lot of issues in the long run. So we need to have this return an input. Well, that's pretty good so far. Let's go ahead and add this to my export list as well. Copy, paste, and change my export here to be my input export, input. And I'm now going to go to my login component and begin styling up one of my inputs. I'm going to have it auto import the input component from the components tree, or components directory. There we go. And well, I want it to ultimately basically replace my email input right here with all of the same props. Now, as if I do this right now, if I copy and paste these props over to my input component, it's going to be very angry because it doesn't know what any of these end up happening to be. So, okay, let's just start kind of abstracting out some of our code and logic here. So some of these, a lot of my students from our course will just strong type each one of these by hand, which is not a great dynamic way to do it, but it does work. Let's show some other cool tricks we could do to build this out in a cool way. So yeah, first off, input props as an empty interface or type, whatever you end up using on your system in your projects. This means you have to write it all out yourself, but as we know, we can combine types with an ampersand or extend interfaces with other interfaces and types by using that extends keyword. And just like we did with the container, I can tell my application that this is going to be a React input type, right? Just like we did on our container where I told it it's going to be a div element ultimately, right? So same thing here. I can say, hey, this is going to extend the React input HTML attributes on an HTML input element. Now, I think that's a little bit different than the container because we just did HTML attributes. I wonder how that differs. We'll start with that one for now and see where it takes us. I'll have to probably pause and look at the differences in the types folder after this video, or pause and do it during your video. But yeah, we'll start with this HTML attributes of an HTML input element. I want all those on there, which now removes a couple of the issues like name, autocomplete, value, and onChange. Guess what? Those are all totally fine. Those are all DOM attributes that we use anyway. So just that one, I'm surprised it's not recognizing type here as well. Property type does not exist on intrinsic attributes and input props. Interesting. What if I switch over to HTML input attribute? No. What was it? What did I try the first time? Input HTML attributes. Huh! There is a difference in those types. Well, I guess not all HTML elements will have the type, which I'm surprised that didn't let it know that. Oh, that's interesting. Again, I'll look into this off camera and give you all a rundown of the differences here because I don't feel like going to the definition and taking a look at it. But yeah, okay, so input HTML attributes now has everything, well, pretty much set to go. And you're wondering, well, dude, that doesn't seem like it's going to help us a whole lot. And, well, again, this is like taking what my students in the full stack bootcamp already know, and maybe you watchers trying to go along with this free. I mean, again, I'm calling this a course now, not just like a YouTube playlist, because this will be like a full, basically building a full stack app course that I'm going to have for free here on YouTube. This is where I feel like you ratchet up your game to the next level when it comes to building out components in React, when you begin to understand, in TypeScript especially, how you can combine these things to strong type your custom built components. Whereas again, in JavaScript, you can just start adding whatever props you wanted on there and call it a day. Okay, so as of right now, TypeScript seems to be happy about all these values existing on our input component without actually typing what they are, just because we're melding two inputs together, or two types together, which I think is awesome. So from here, we do want some level of customization with class names and things like that, because ultimately, in Tailwind CSS with Daisy UI, this is the bare minimum you would need to get away with styling a decent input, I'm pretty sure. So if I just add the input keyword on there, what does it end up doing here? Where did I even paste this thing, right? It's in the login. It's in between the two inputs, so we can't currently see it. Because we need to add a border to it, but it's there. There it is. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, check it out. Like, we added that input class name, and maybe we do want a border on it. Maybe we don't want a border on it because it needs a class name of input-bordered to have a border on it. So it's not a default thing for the input, right? And form control goes on the containing element, so I might put that on a div or our form. Maybe we'll make one for a label as well, but I'm going to focus on the input and button components for this particular tutorial, and again, then build everything and style it offline, and then going over it in the next video as a high-level overview, and then continuing to add fun, cool features like sessions and campaigns to our back end, our database, and then coming back to our front end. So we're actually going to get back into feature building and not styling, which again is just my dread. It really is just... maybe y'all want to see me style, but I don't. So get in the comments and tell me if I'm wrong. All right, like I said, the input is like the base class name that we really have to worry about for this thing to do its job, right? And from there, I can say, well, all of my inputs should be bordered for this entire project. Maybe that's a call that you're making for this project, which is fine if you do, right? So check it out. That's fine if you do it that way, you know? But maybe we're going to say that maybe not all of my inputs will always have borders. Maybe I need it to be some kind of optional class name. So we could do that, again, through writing switch statements or ternaries or things like that. But there's actually a cool little library that I've been using recently that I kind of discovered by accident called CLSX, which is a very small little library that allows us to conditionally construct class names, right? So it's pretty cool what it can do, right? So there's a whole bunch of variants or passing in like object properties of Boolean values or existing things to add to our class name. So it's a function that we call, it's an object. I should zoom in so y'all can see. It's an object. We can pass like an object in, which is typically what I do, where the properties are the class names you wish to apply based on Boolean style values, which I think is pretty cool, right? So yeah, so bar is false, so it does not add bar to the class list. Foo is true, so it adds that in there. Baz calls a function called is true, so maybe some kind of check to see if the Baz class name is supposed to be there, and it'll add Baz. It's a really sleek way to not have to write a large number of and potentially nested ternaries in order to add class names. In the same way I showed y'all how easy it was with TW-merge to solve merging conflicting class names together. This is another way of conditionally rendering class names that is very intuitive, very easy to use, and I'm a huge fan of it. Takes arrays, and as you can see, for undefined or falsy data types, like 0 is a falsy value in JavaScript, not false because that's a Boolean, but falsy, as you can see, it does nothing for adding class names from this array. Foo is a truthy string, so it gets added. Bar is a truthy string, so it gets added. False is, well, falsy in value. 0 is falsy in value, so they get ignored from the array and added there, right? So if you have some checks in there. I think it's really cool what you can do, right? So I'm not going to dive too heavily into their documentation API, but you're welcome to do so. But I'm going to install and use it to build out my input component because I'll show you all some cool things you could do. Again, I'm trying to find lessons in styling and not just saying, all right, write input dash SM here, write W dash full here. Like, I'm trying to make this more interesting from my perspective. And hopefully, again, teach y'all something cool along the way that you might not have known before this video series. Right, so I don't think every input should be bordered. I think that should be an option I can pass in to make them bordered or not. So yeah, we're going to remove that for now, and we're going to know that the initial class name we really care about is just the input class name. So from here, right, we need to see what we can do. I mean, I don't want to have to write props out everywhere. Y'all know I'm a cool kid and I like doing ES6 object destructuring Erlware. So we're going to focus on grabbing some of the main props. And as you can see, TypeScript autocomplete, because of this extends React input HTML attributes, is automatically autofilling with all possible kinds of typical properties, attributes you will see on inputs in HTML. So that's why it already knows what value is. It will know what placeholder is. It's going to know what type is. It's going to know as well value and on-chain should be as well. Those should be handled for us here, right? But why did I do that for value? Why is it not? Oh, because I have it twice. Sorry about that. I think I just hit insert. There we go. So, and then we could do one of these right here. We spread out the rest of the props so we can add them to the input itself, right? So, as well as class name. A class name is going to be something we're going to have to worry about individually here. So I'm going to go ahead and write class name, right? Because clearly we want to be able to eventually pass some custom class names to this input should it require it, right? So considering I just in Did I install it? Did I install? Did I talk about it and not install it? I did install it. Okay, I'm losing my mind. Yeah, so we're eventually going to be using from tailwind-merge the twmerge function. From CSLX, we'll use CSLX from CSLX. There we go. And what I can do now is I can generate a variable here. So technically, it'll redo this every single time it re-renders. That's okay. That's fine for like a little local variable, locally scoped variable for the input function called classes. That's going to be a call to a merge of, well, our base class we know is going to be input. Any additional class names that we pass into this component from where we render it, whatever additional class names we pass in, right? And eventually we're gonna call CSLX, but we're gonna do that in a minute here, okay? So for now, this is what I'm gonna focus on, just the merge of the input class as well as any other classes I might be passing in from the top level when we render this thing. So let's see if that actually works thus far. It should, with any luck. Coming back over yonder. If I pass in a class name of, let's say, input-bordered, like that, and maybe like a quick shadow, just something obvious so we can see if it's working or not, if it's properly merging in our additional class names to this thing. So yeah, so it has a border, it has a fat shadow. Our class names are now successfully merging in without any issue. So again, like we can see how, hopefully see how being able to pass in class names to merge in there is fine. And you're wondering, well, Luke, what's the point in going any further if I can just keep adding my class names on there? Again, like I'm trying to make lessons wherever I can. So for example, in Daisy UI and Tailwind, you have a couple of different input sizes that you can mess with. And a couple of different input colors as well. So we can always take the time to try and make that into some constants across our application, include them in our TypeScript interfaces, and receive some nice IntelliSense support as we try and fill things out. Hello, Percival. If you're going to be on camera, come say hello, dude. If you're going to be a YouTuber, don't get a cat, because they will always find a way to come and ruin things or interrupt things. Isn't that right, buddy? Okay, he'll be wandering around being annoying as possible. That's just like primary drive in life, evidently. Right. So like I said, we can have a defined set of classes, or like sizes and colors that all of our components, not just inputs, like buttons and things, will all have the same values, like primary, secondary, accent, info, success, warning, error, and all the same sizes across our application of large, medium, small, XS. These are all consistently used class or names for class names that we see across our application, right? I think that's pretty cool. So if I wanted to use that globally, I could actually make a constants folder or file that defines these variables. There's actually a pretty cool trick you could do with TypeScript as well that I'll show y'all here. So we're going to export out a couple constants for use across our application, such as we have colors and we have statuses. So there are some things in Daisy UI that are referred to as brand colors that includes things like primary, secondary, and accent, which are different from statuses, I would argue, of like info, success, and warning and error. Those are like statuses that could be used across our applications, whereas these are more of like our brand colors here, right? These are our branding colors across our application. So we're going to break these into two pieces here. So for brand, we have primary, we have secondary, and we have accent, okay? Those are our brand colors for our application. We also have status colors, I can call them, I suppose, which were those colors of info, success, warning, and error is what they were as well, right? Yeah. Cool. So those are our status colors. We can call them component colors because technically that's what they're going to be filling in right there as well. We'll call them our status colors for meow. And we have these combined to build out our component colors. Where we can say export const component colors equals. Now, what we're going to say is it's going to be a spread out array of our brand colors, a spread out array of our status colors, and the additional one that's provided in Daisy UI is called Ghost if you want it to be a like hidden input like that, no background input, a ghost input. That's the one that doesn't really fit in the rest here, so I can just go ahead and say we're going to have a ghost value in there as well. So, you know, there we go. We can just do it in that order so it looks nicer. Cool. There you go. So now we kind of have like an array of our brand colors, our status colors, and our component colors that we can then utilize across our types if we need to. I can also add this here for things like themes and sizing, which, oh yeah, we can do that, couldn't we? For const component sizes, which was LG, we had medium, we had small, and we had extra small as our sizes here, okay? So again, if IntelliSense is trying to help me here with these values, if I import these constants over somewhere to include into a type, for example, how does that help us, right? So check it out. Yeah. I want to import one of those here and use it, so let's go ahead and do a quick testorino. We'll say from the constants file located in this directory, constants, I want the, let's say, brand colors included here for our input colors, right? Now, if I reference brand colors, it recognizes it's a string array, but there's a cool trick that you can do that you can, because again, we have a set number of possible brand colors, and a string array for TypeScript IntelliSense purposes isn't super helpful, right? When dealing with this array. So if I want to reference something, brand colors at 0, it knows it's a string array, but it can't tell me what that value might be, right? It has no clue what it's going to be here. But what's interesting is that if we add the keyword as const to our export here, this is a cool TypeScript const export that we could utilize. This is a yeah, it's as const is a way in advanced TypeScript tutorials from an advanced TypeScript tutorial series. It covers this usage. Yeah, so it's meant to like export out the constants as the values. So not just like the string array as the type, but as the actual constant values found within. And it recognizes that now index 0 is not just, oh, that's the first element of whatever this array is going to be. It recognizes that that constant value is the value primary, which is far more useful to us as developers using TypeScript. This is something I learned not that long ago, and I think it's like the coolest thing ever. Like if you're building out a game or something like that, this is very important. Looking at you out there, Eric, if you're watching, you probably really appreciate this trick that I picked up, and you can also utilize across your application where you have constant values everywhere that you would like to receive a little bit more IntelliSense support on, right? So now it recognizes that brand 1 is also secondary, so there you go. I think that's insanely cool that it could infer that kind of stuff just by adding those keywords, those exports in our constants file here. So yeah, I'll learn you something new, hopefully. Yeah. That way, again, it shows us not just the type that's inside the array, but the specific value or constant value inside of the array. So yeah, I thought that was really nifty, and I hope you all appreciate it as well. Okay, so how does that help us down here? Well, like I said, I may wish to choose to combine some of these things in my types somewhere, like my possible component colors, which I think we're going to grab here because that's what inputs can go ahead and do, right? And we can combine that here with our types as well. So I can have something like type component colors is going to be a type of the component colors array and a number provided that will grab what color comes from the component colors, right? So now it's going to be, hey, it's a list of these possible colors as this type right here, which means I can now say that, hey, if I'm going to provide a variant or style, I shouldn't do style because style is a property of HTML elements. If I provide a key name of variant that's optional, it needs to be one of the component color types, right? Which are those possible values because I did the export const. And I also did a cool little TypeScript trick right here to say, hey, component colors will be one type of these possible values from my component colors, which I think is super dang cool. And again, if you're wondering, I might need to make this type multiple places across my application, so we could choose to export it from input, which wouldn't make sense. But I could also add it to my to a types file here that I import around from my components directory, right? So I could also have a types file that we'll do here in just a moment. So yeah, that right there is a cool trick also to really streamline your component building in your React application. So how does it actually tie into the input styling itself? Let's continue on this lovely little journey here. So yeah, like I said, this particular prop variant we don't really have to worry about adding it to our component here, but I do need to do the following, right? So we know how the classes got added there. Anything I haven't destructured, value placeholder type, those have been destructured, so I need to add them manually. So I'll say the type of input will be the one I pass in. The placeholder will be the one I pass in as a prop. And the value is whatever I pass in as a prop. Now, any additional attributes or props I'm adding to my input, like autocomplete and name and the onChange, those will be passed in as the ... rest, like we saw on the container example from the previous video. They will simply get spread along as props onto this input to make sure it is wired up as it should be. So at the moment, I want to make sure I've not broken anything horribly with a big error in my console log. We can see now that I have a input appearing, no problem. It has an input border around it because I passed that class name into here. We can also, for some of these things, we may not, because we're working with Tailwind, ultimately we may not mind just big goofy ass class name lists being added to inputs here. But how about we learn something? Oh yeah, I had variant as a possibility, right? So inside of variant, this is where when I figured this stuff out a few years ago, I really felt like I leveled up my personal TypeScripting game. Being able to do stuff like having a list of constants that you export out with these as const types, which is also the basically TypeScript's version of that as well, right there. That's the same way you can do that. When it comes to types, being able to do stuff like this and have that autofill, that auto help saying, oh, it's one of these possible values because we've told TypeScript specifically what the types are. Like I said, it's a spectrum, and this is something I like because I love having these autocomplete things right here. So if we do something like variant primary, let's see what that ends up changing, if anything. Well, looks like it didn't change anything, oddly enough. That's weird, because it definitely should be applying the color there for us, right? No, it won't, because I haven't added it anywhere, right? So I just realized I'm a dummy. If I go to my Elements tab and click on the input there, I pass it in as a prop safely in TypeScript. Variant primary is the prop there, because I didn't destructure variant out, right? I didn't destructure it out, so it simply added it as a prop via the ... rest spread. So let's pull that out of our spread list, so that way it's no longer in there. And now we have to combine that here with our class name somehow. And you're wondering, how can we do that? Well, that's where CSLX comes into play, right? So CSLX, I said, is going to be added here for any additional, even Boolean style props we want to pass in to style this component here. So we're actually going to do that here we're going to do it this way instead. I'm going to say that there will be a optional bordered Boolean value that I'm going to be passing into this component. I'm going to make the decision that if bordered is, since it's optional, I'm going to give it a default value of true. That way, not GI trumpet, of true. That way, if they do not provide the bordered prop, I want it to default to have a border anyway. So again, this would require some if-else statements in traditional code, but you could use CSLX in the following fashion. I can say, hey, this class name of input bordered, we saw from the brief look at their documentation, the property of the object is the class name you wish to add, and its existence will be based on this bordered Boolean value that I may or may not pass in. And I just format everything there, so it went vertical. Sorry about that. It's just muscle memory, force of habit. I type a couple lines of code, I hit format, muscle memory. That's what happened. So just because I'm starting to destructure so much, it made it all vertical. So check it out. We now have that bordered prop as a Boolean that defaults to true being passed in. If it is if we pass in false, this should be false, and the input bordered class should not be added. But because this is being built by my merge function, it should be built onto our classes. So let's go to our login component and remove the class name input bordered. Let's remove variant primary since we're doing nothing with it, and let's see what happens, right? It should stay the same, which is not very fun to look at on a refresh, right? It stayed the same. But let's see what happens if I pass in a bordered of value false now, because I'm going to say, hey, I want this one to be a ghost input. I don't want actually to be appearing. Check it out, y'all. We now successfully have added a cool little variant we can have on our inputs by passing in a Boolean, which I think is pretty dang cool, right? So back towards variant and having it add a color to our inputs here. How can we have this ratchet up? So like I said, through the CSLX documentation, we can pass a possible array of values, which we do have, right? We have... Do we need to do an array? I don't know. I don't know if this will work. We're going to find out. Yeah, so we're going to do... I'm guessing it won't like the template literals here, but we're going to see. Input, and we'll do color with a value... Oh, no, we called it variant in this particular project, and we'll call this one variant as well. I need to pull it out, which I did. So I don't think it likes the template literals here, so if I put them in square brackets for... yeah. So, you know, strings are valid properties for JavaScript objects. I don't think JavaScript likes template literals for object properties. So the way you do dynamic named or dynamic variabled object properties is via square brackets, hence what those are there for. That's not some weird CSLX syntactical thing we're looking at here. This is a JavaScript object thing, okay? And it's as simple as this. That translates to a string property of Luke, right? I could do a string name that allows me to do property names that I couldn't do in JavaScript, because JavaScript would interpret that as his minus age, right? It would look for a variable calls his and subtract age from it, and it's like, you probably shouldn't do that. That's not a good way to name variables here. But it's the same problem if I put it in square brackets, because it still thinks it's going to be an array of his minus age. But again, square brackets are dynamic object properties and objects, and that's how I can provide and use template literal syntax and not have to do concatenation and things like that. So this is a fundamental JavaScript lesson and not some weird CSLX thing. But theoretically now it should merge on the class names of input bordered, always to be true unless I specify false. And should I provide a variant, it should, because variant will be a truthy value of one of these things, right? If I don't provide it, it's undefined, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's undefined. If I don't provide one, it's not there, therefore this is false, therefore it does not add this class name. If I provide one of my possible variants, like primary, secondary, accent, etc., if I add them, that's a truthy string value, which means it'll add this class name to my input, including input dash and the color name, which is from this right here, right? With their colors, you simply have a bordered input with the accent or brand theme color that you wish to add on there. So yeah, that should be the way that we do that for our input here. So let's see what happens. There's the border. It's supposed to have the input info color here. Now I've had this issue with Tailwind and Daisy UI before, where I need to do something to one of the other inputs for it to recognize that color change. So I'm not sure why it's not liking that color that I asked it to do. Interesting, because watch this. If I add bordered input, let's do warning. So that's what I'm like simulating here for this input while passing in that info color right there. Interesting that it's not adding the color to that one, but it did to the top one, even though it's the exact list of class names, right? I mean, it's there. Taking a look at it, yeah, input bordered, input dash info. Class names are added. It's the exact same class names in the input above it, so I'm sure there's some kind of React shenanigans going on that I have not quite caught on yet. That's peculiar that it did it that way. Dead air, Luke. That's dead air. Your worst nightmare is where something happens that you can't right away reason out. But again, welcome to development. This is how it just works. What if I do warning on this as well? It's the same one up there. I'm going to laugh if this ends up working. Really? I mean, info is one of the available colors. It's that light blue one. Maybe I just didn't notice it. Yeah, that's very bizarre. Oh, error is the variant we want for this input. Huh. I don't know why it's doing that. The class name is most certainly there. And for some reason, me forcing this component to save and refresh by changing that input's color is triggering the other one to successfully update like it should. This has to be some weird Tailwind, Daisy UI, React chain toolchain thing, because this is bonkers that I have to have like another input on the screen with the same colors for it to work. I'll look into that. But nevertheless, the class name is there, so you shouldn't... It's being correctly built, but I'm not sure why it's not getting caught during build time. And I'm sure there's something because of the way I built this project. That's going to be the issue that I'll have to look into. But such is life. I'll dig into that off camera. But for now, you have learned some cool things you could do that would probably work for, say, building this in Vite or Create React App or Next.js, where you build like a component library. This is working the way it should. And we can do the exact same thing for the sizing of our application as well. So we can say import component sizes, and then we can have a type for that. It's going to be one of these possible sizes from this array. Component sizes, and that's an optional one that we can also say pull it out here in our destructure. I told you I'm a destructure boy, and that's how it is what it is right there. That's going to be one of our potential class size names. So we're going to say, once again, dynamic value of input dash and the sizing prop we passed in. Its display will be based on the truthiness of the sizing prop, whether it's passed in or not. So again, it'll correctly add the class names on there, but I'm worried that it won't display correctly unless I make the other input also do that size there. So I can say sizing is going to be one large size here. So again, I'm going to laugh if I need to do this in order for it to trigger that way. That's so bonkers that I have to make one of the other inputs do it for it to do that. It definitely goes large. Like I said, the class names do get added there correctly, but I am absolutely dumbfounded that that right there is not working. It is working. Well, again, I truly think it's an issue somewhere between the Tailwind build process, my Webpack and TypeScript compiling process not working here. I'm going to dig into it off camera and try and find out what that issue is wherever I can. So yeah, it does work. And this technique is fine. And again, y'all learned something cool and new about CLSX and being able to dynamically add class names without having to write a bunch of ternaries or weird logic to do so. This will really streamline adding class names dynamically with variants to your components that you build here in React and TypeScript. Yeah, so yeah, that right there is just about rounding out our inputs. Now, we haven't talked about refs yet on something else. Like, there's something cool you could do with React components is sometimes you might see that they have a weird display value in your React dev tools. A lot of times you'll see this in production or something like that, where it'll have a weird A or weird name there. If you want to retain its outputted display name in production, there is a display name, I'm pretty sure. Well, it's interesting it doesn't want to do that, because I've done this before. I'll check that out in a minute, because it should recognize that it returns. Well, first off, I can tell it returns specifically a JSX element. There's this return type. Because React components can have a display name property that adjusts that. So I'll look into why it's not recognizing that display name piece right there. Always something small that boggles me, but slows me down, y'all. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, that's how we can pass in colors and custom sizes and Boolean values to style our inputs throughout this whole project. And everything should still work the exact same way. So with that in mind, let's get rid of the variant and sizing because that should be fine. And now what I think is really cool is that all I need to do is change this to a capital IN input. And that one should also automatically scale and look nice with our code here. So yeah, I am pretty stoked that it's working out like that way, right? Yeah. So from here, what we could do is, like I said, for the form itself, we can do form control. Yeah, we're going to add that to a div because for Daisy UI, like I'm thinking about how they do their inputs with labels. The way they do it is they have a form control div element that wraps the labels and the input. So this is how you can control the positions of labels, either being left, right, top right, bottom left, bottom right. That is doable with Daisy UI and Tailwind with the class name form control on a div above the element itself. So I'm actually going to do the form control around this input. So I'm going to say, hey, I need a div with the class name of form control around that input. The label is going to match the HTML4 is going to match the name or ID property of our input here. So for screen reader accessibility there. And we'll write our email, and it needs a class name of label for Tailwind Daisy UI to do its job. And that should be, or do they do a span inside of that? Yeah, they do label and a span inside of that. So span label dash text email is how they control these elements here for positioning purposes. So yeah, booyah, email, right? So again, issue here is that when you add the input and form control classes, it just makes it a block level element, hence why it is now taking up the full width of the space and a block and forcing the other inline input still to be, well, inline because the login button's still inline next to it. That right there can be handled by doing a more classes on our form control here by saying, hey, on mobile browsers, I do want full width because that makes sense for mobile browsers like that, right? That makes sense for mobile browsers. But what I don't want, I want it to have a max width of extra small. So anything above like a tablet or whatnot, it does not need to be full width anymore, right? It can be a smaller input. So that's what that max width XS means. So big size on mobile's fine, smaller size width on this size here, right? And we can also add some rules to our form. So I can say, hey, go to a flex column, right? So we can do flex call. I'm not going to write a bunch of CSS and make y'all listen to it, says guy currently doing that. Again, this is just a quick and dirty version of it. I'll do way more off camera, just throwing out some generalities here. That way, now we have everything vertical the way we need it to be vertical. And I can also now say center things horizontally and vertically. Remember, those rules are swapped on flex column. So items becomes horizontal, justify becomes vertical because of the flex column. They'd be reversed without the flex call keyword there, right? But again, that just gives me more control over my elements here, my components. Let's add, we don't need this H1 anymore because we know what the login screen is going to be. This is going to switch to a container component that I'm going to be importing in from my container components. This will switch down to a closing container. This div is now getting blown away. There we go. Yeah, let's copy this div, paste it, change and move this input over in place of this one. Change the for attribute to be password. Change the label text to also be password. There we go. All right, looking good in the neighborhood, y'all. And we have a much cleaner and nicer looking form. Check that out. All right. Yeah, and it's centered nicely, and it's not too big on larger screen sizes because it doesn't need to be super big. Let's bump that button down a little bit with some quick styling. Bump it down, btn dash, let's do primary for our class name right there, and that should give us a nice looking little login button inside of this form, and voila. And I guess we could do something like, what's the class name for it here? btn wide, I think it was, for Tailwind and Daisy UI, please. Hey, looking good. All right. Yeah, so, again, quick and dirty, but hopefully you all got the point on how to make this input here. It's already been 44 minutes. I'm going to do the same thing for the button, probably off camera. If I do any major file or reorganizing here, because I personally do something different on my personal projects, is different than this, but might get to it. Yeah, so off camera, I'm going to style, but anything I move around, so for example, I'll have a constants file and typically a types file that streamlines all this as well, so I can import them from one location and not from the input. It'd be kind of dumb to make a button component, right? And then from that button component, importing from the input component these types because they're kind of universal. So I'd make a types file that has them in there instead. So types.ts, where I will say export. No, I mean, let's copy and paste these, right? So copy, paste right there. They don't know what those values are, and they need to know what they are. So I can write import those values into this particular file so they can use them, and export those types out, which means I can nuke that, nuke these, and ask it to quick fix, add all missing imports like that. That way I have my types brought in as well. Now, if you're, you can also add the import type syntax right there to make sure it has no output on your production bundle to guarantee that. So all that is just TS cleanup that makes this a bit more universal to use here. So yeah, that's some very cool stuff that I hope y'all appreciate. And yeah, I'm going to style off video and explain everything on the high points and give you all a commit to take a look at. But if you really want me to style everything by hand, which you got a taste of when you saw me blindly on the login component typing in some class names and looking at the Daisy UI doc, if you really want me to do that across the app, let me know. But I'm more interested in getting back to features because I have so many in mind that we could add to this app to keep on scaling it up with cooler and cooler things. So hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you all in the comments. Just remember, like, comment, subscribe. Really subscribe to our channel because we're almost at 5K. I would love to see that 5,000. I'll feel very proud to help get our channel there and, well, teaching you guys this free course on YouTube. So ta-ta for now.